If he's gonna help keep his family out of the poorhouse, he's gotta help Papa write the last verse of his song. Is it worth watching? Find out when I look at Indescribable on this week's Indy Christian Review. The love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure, the saints' and angels' song. That's the chorus of the hymn, The Love of God. It was written in 1917 by Frederick Lehman and is a pretty awesome song. Now, you've probably heard it before, but what you may not have heard is the story behind the song. Well, that's what Indescribable is all about. Written, produced, and directed by husband-wife team Joseph and Stacy Graber, Indescribable was filmed in Texas in the summer of 2011 and just came out in April 2013. A fun trivia tidbit for you. Joseph and Stacy met, courted, and married during the pre-production of this film. I think that's pretty awesome. Now, the bulk of the movie takes place in Pasadena, California in 1917. World War I is in full swing and times are tough as people do what they can to support the fighting of the war to end all wars. But the story also takes us back to the time of the First Crusade, specifically in Worms, Germany, but we'll come back to that part later. Meet the Lehman family. There's Papa, Mama, Oma Frederica, Claudia and her husband William, Walter, Eva, Theodore, Pauline, Blynn, Fern, Wilma, and Donald. Now, the story is actually about 10-year-old Blynn. He's kind of the leader of the youngest four siblings and is very adventurous and has a very active imagination. And he also has a very close relationship with Walter, the oldest brother. So, onto the story. After an introductory scene and narration by Blynn from 20 years later, we get a flashback to the First Crusade, where we find out about a Count Emiko who raised an army to attack the Jews for his own gain. Flash forward to 1917, where we see 10-year-old Blynn playing with his friend Eddie. On their way home, they pass by Mama Ellie's boarding house where many poor people live. Okay, that's not really how it is, but it may as well be as far as Blynn's concerned. That evening at dinner, the oldest Lehman's son, Walter, makes a surprise visit from Chicago. He tells the family that he's been drafted to fight in World War I. Theodore objects since the Lehmans have family in Germany, but Blynn, on the other hand, practically begs Walter to go.
You've got to fight. We're not going to the boarding house. You got to fight. We're Americans. We're not Huns.
Let's get down to business to defeat the Huns.
Sorry. After dinner, Papa calls a family meeting and reveals that he's had to take on a second job because the church he pastors can't afford to pay him full-time anymore. This inspires Blynn to call a meeting of his own with the three younger siblings, his twin sister Fern, Wilma, and Donald, to discuss how they can help the family. None of their ideas work until Papa tells Blynn that he can work with him at the factory. Ah, the good old days before child labor laws. While working at the factory, Blynn sees Papa working on writing a song about God's love. Unfortunately, Papa can't seem to come up with a third verse. Later, Blynn overhears some guys talking about a songwriter that made thousands of dollars. Blynn tells his fail-proof plan to the younger siblings. All they have to do is help Papa write that third verse, and their financial troubles are over. But as you might expect, this proves to be a lot harder than he thought. But when Blynn finds a card that has some great words, the search is on to find the author so they can get permission to use the words. They discover, though, that the history of the words go back to the time of the First Crusade. See how that all ties in now? All in all, this is a pretty incredible movie. Now, as Blynn tries to learn about the author of the card, he also struggles with his own relationship with God. Now, learning how to love someone you can't see, hear, or feel is a hard concept for a 10-year-old to grasp. I mean, most adults struggle with that too. But being able to see through a child's eyes the journey of learning how to love God in a practical way is very inspiring. Now, since the main cast are kids, you might expect this to be a very happy-go-lucky, frivolous, fun, family, squeaky clean movie. Well, not necessarily. It actually deals with some pretty heavy topics and can throw some pretty deep curveballs at us. I mean, during the medieval scenes, there's actually a scene where we see the start of a racially driven massacre that was a real historical event. Now, parents don't freak out. I'm not saying it's like some sudden bloodfest or anything. We're basically seeing it through the perspective of a 10-year-old's imagination, and granted, a 10-year-old who's read a lot of G.A. Henty boys' adventure novels, but it still is very tame. It's still, I mean, okay, Dove gave it a family-friendly seal of approval. It's okay, trust me. Now, overall, the story is well-paced, the characters have compelling arcs, and the script is pretty well written. Now, since the story is about Blynn, since there's a large number of the Lehman family, most of them tend to just sort of be there. Now, most of them don't really have any big influence or impact on the story. I mean, most of them all contribute something at some point, even if it's pretty small. But that said, I think it actually helps reinforce that this is Blynn's story and we're seeing, his world through his eyes. I mean, how observant were you when you were 10 years old? I mean, as kids, we kind of don't really see the full picture of the grown-up world around us. We only catch snippets and bits and pieces, and a lot of times we'll even misinterpret what we hear, and we see that with Blynn. So while you could argue that, yeah, the characters don't really do enough, I think it actually helps reinforce this is really Blynn's story and that it helps us understand his journey and perspective. Now, as far as the actual story, like I said, it's pretty well written. There's some good foreshadowing of certain events that happen later on that I'm not going to spoil, and the overall structure is solid. The biggest weakness I think the script has is the dialogue. Even taking period dialect into account, there were just some lines that made me go, certain turns of phrases that characters it didn't fit with the characters, or lines that were really kind of redundant and could have been left out. Overall, 95% of the dialogue was great, it works well. There was just a little bit that could have been changed, maybe even some of them cut out in the edit. Now, as far as the acting, the lead cast is pretty solid. The kids kind of come and go, but that's, lack of experience on their part, but I did see a lot of great potential. And the well-written dialogue does help the performance of the weaker actors, though some of the really, really minor characters were not all that great, but they only have 1 or 2 lines, so it's fine. Come to think of it, that's actually a trend I've noticed in Christian movies. The lead cast will be solid, but then the secondary and minor cast isn't always up to par. I understand that with independent films you work with what you get, but I don't know, it's just something I've noticed. Interesting. But like I said, the lead cast is great. I found myself getting emotionally involved with them, and the emotional moments made me emotional, so that's always a good thing. Visually, the movie is very well made. Great camera work, great editing, and the music is amazing. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the song does eventually get written, since, we have it today. But when we first hear it in the soundtrack, it's performed by gospel singer Guy Penrod, and it is an epic moment. So, is Indescribable worth watching? Absolutely. It's a very moving, very heartwarming, very inspiring movie that the whole family can enjoy. I highly recommend it. To pick up your own copy, go to indescribablethemovie.com. And that's all the time we have. Thank you for watching Indy Christian Review. I'm the storyteller. May God bless you, and may God bless independent Christian films. You know what? To close out this episode, I'm going to play The Love of God. See you next time.